Hello again. Welcome to the second video for section 1, which is on X and Y intercepts. So we're going to, as good note takers, title this with section 1, intercepts. And we're going to do some definitions. So what I like to do is I actually like to introduce these at the same time. So we're going to define x-intercepts and we're going to define y-intercepts kind of at the same time, okay? So first things first, we know that x is not always called x because it can be any variable that would be the input. So we also know that it's the horizontal axis from the previous video. So you can also call this the horizontal intercept. And because the y is typically the vertical axis, you can also call the y-intercept the vertical intercept. So know that these are interchangeable, okay? It all goes from the previous video. So what I like to do is I like to do these threefold. We're going to talk about this from a graphical point of view, from a numerical point of view, and then from a formula point of view. Because those, remember, are the three things we're always going to go between, okay? So x-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the x-axis, or again, the horizontal axis. Now, the key word here is the word point, okay? We know that this has to be an ordered pair. An x-intercept is incomplete, or any kind of intercept is incomplete if you're only giving one value, okay? So the x-intercept has to have an xy coordinate, and the y-intercept has to have an xy coordinate. But because it has to cross the x-axis, okay, let's draw a little picture on the side. Here's a picture of a line. And the point where it's crossing the x-axis is here. Well, if I'm on the x-axis, did I move in the y direction at all? No, I didn't. So that must mean the y value is 0. So the ordered pair is always going to be some x value, comma 0. So it always occurs when y equals 0, okay? So another way to say this is y is always 0, okay? And that's a piece of the definition of the x-intercept. So using the same picture, we can also do the y-intercept. The y-intercept is going to occur here because it's where we cross the y-axis. So we can see that we can almost mirror the same definition, except we're going to talk about y instead of x. So this is going to be the point where the graph crosses the y-axis, or the vertical axis, okay? And that must mean that we didn't move horizontally at all. So the x value is 0. So it's going to be 0, comma, whatever y value you moved, okay? It's always going to take on that form. And in other words, that means that x is always 0. Okay, so that's how you would define the x or the y-intercept if you have it. Okay, these are the graphical definitions, all right, because we're talking about ordered pairs, we're talking about points on a graph. Now we're going to talk about it through a table definition, okay, which we actually almost have also. If I were to give you a table, just like we did in the first video, okay, with x comma y, and you saw some number paired with 0, and you saw 0 paired with some number, okay, whatever numbers those are. you should be able, from these two definitions so far, to determine that this is telling me my x-intercept, and this is telling me my y-intercept. Because again, my x-intercept occurs when y equals 0, my y-intercept occurs when x equals 0. So that's actually what we're going to say next. To tell graphic, or in a table, it occurs, the x-intercept occurs when y equals 0. That's what we're looking for. It's always the opposite letter. And the y-intercept occurs when x equals 0. Okay, so again, being able to tell from the table. Last but not least, we have to be able to find them in a formula, okay, algebraically. And so we're going to just continue with this idea that y has to be 0 to be considered the x-intercept, to be sitting on the x-axis. So that means that to find it, to actually calculate it, we're going to plug 0 in for y, because y has to be 0, and solve for x. And that might require you to remember a little bit of algebra, okay? Only a couple step algebra, all right? And we'll do some problems like that. And then similarly for the y-intercept, to find, plug 0 in for x and find y, okay? So we're going to go with these definitions, and we're going to find the x and y intercepts. So here's our first example. 2x plus 4y equals 12. Find the x and y intercepts. Here's my recommendation. Because you know these threefold definitions, I would label the work that I'm about to do. Here, I'm going to do work to find the x-intercept. Here, I'm going to do work to find the y-intercept. So I'm just going to label the work that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to give myself a hint also. I know that the x-intercept occurs when y equals 0. So I'm just going to put that in parentheses, give myself a hint. I know that the y-intercept occurs when x equals 0. So again, I'm going to give myself a hint. Now, don't mix up the two. We're doing two separate things here, okay? So this is kind of a downfall that students have. They find each one and then they write it as 1 point. You're not finding 1 point, you're finding 2. You're finding 1 point for the x-intercept and 1 point for the y-intercept. So make sure you realize that these are going to be two distinct points. And 0 has to be a part of each of them. So if the x-intercept occurs when y equals 0, then that means that in this problem, I'm going to do exactly what we set up here and plug 0 in for y. Remember what we said in the previous video. Anytime we plug in with parentheses. That is going to be our big saying for the entire semester, right? We always plug in with parentheses. So this will be 2x plus 4 times 0 equals 12. Now we have to do a little tiny bit of algebra. Anything times 0, though, this is why we love zeros, is 0. So that goes away. And we're really left with 2x equals 12. And then how do we get x by itself? We have to divide both sides by 2. And so x equals 6. But we are not done because a single number is not an intercept. An intercept is an ordered pair. So this is the ordered pair 6, 0, because this was my x and 0 was my y. So that's the first ordered pair that I found for the x-intercept. Now let's go through similar work for the y-intercept. The y-intercept occurs when x equals 0. So everywhere we see x, we're going to plug 0 in parentheses. This is why we love zeros, because anything times 0 is 0. So we have 4y equals 12. And to get y by itself, we have to divide by 4. And so y equals 3. Again, this is not the answer, because the answer has to be an ordered pair when you're talking about an intercept. It's a point on a graph. And so this is the ordered pair 0, 3, because 0 was my x and 3 was my y. Now, here's another piece of good news. You now have two ordered pairs. You could plot these two ordered pairs, and you could connect the dots, or you could plug in another value up here, another value for x, complete a table, and find another ordered pair, and you could plot these points and see what this graph looks like. So you could continue to set up a table, because that's exactly what we started doing here. We found two ordered pairs. We found that 6, 0 and 0, 3 should be on this graph. I could pick any other point I want here. It's up to you. Plug it in for x, do a little bit of math, and find the y. So that is up to you if you wanted to find another point. But this would be finding the x and the y intercepts. Now, here's the question. Why are x and y intercepts important? They're important because we're going to have to be able to interpret graphs. So this is an example from the textbook. And this is a real life situation where we're looking at the mortgage balance, n monthly payments occurring, so however many monthly payments that have been made, and then what the balance remaining is. Okay, so the remaining balance in dollars. You're going to be asked to figure out a whole bunch of things from this graph, okay, based on all the information that we've learned so far in the previous video and this video. So what is the input in this diagram, in this graph? Input is the x-axis, the horizontal axis. So n, which is the number of payments, is our input. Okay, now it's not x, which is important to note. Okay, so we know that the input in this example is n, which is the number of monthly payments. What does that mean the output is in this situation? The output would be what's on the vertical axis. The output is B, that's the variable that they're using, which is the balance in dollars. Okay, this is all important to note. If you had to describe what's happening in this graph, we read a graph the same way we read words, from left to right. So if I followed this graph from left to right, I would describe it as decreasing because it is going down as I follow it from left to right. So this mortgage balance is decreasing as the monthly payments go on. So as I make more payments, I'm going to have less of a balance that I have to pay off. What is the scale that they're using on each axis? Again, what does that mean? Scale is the same as increment, which is what you're counting by. Okay, so that's another vocab word. Scale is kind of the same thing as increment from the previous video. So what are we counting by? On the x-axis, on the n-axis, we are counting by 24s, every 24 months. On the output axis, on the B axis, we're counting by 50,000. Goes up by 50,000 every time. We want to know, based on this picture, what the y-intercept is, or the vertical intercept is, and what does it mean? So we want to find the y-intercept and interpret, okay? Remember that we want the vertical intercept. That's where it crosses the vertical axis. So this right here, this is our vertical intercept. So I just found the vertical intercept as 0, 450,000. I want to know what that means. Well, you already have this information because you've already asked yourself, what is my input and what is my output? These two questions are critical before answering any kind of word problem. Any kind of problem you're posed with, you should answer for yourself. What is my input here? What is my output here? So all of my ordered pairs are months, comma, balance, N comma B. So what does this mean? This means that at 0 months, so when I've made no monthly payments, my mortgage balance was $450,000. That's a really important point because that means at the beginning, I took out, or I owed $450,000 on my mortgage. It doesn't continue all the way that we would need it here, but the x-intercept or the horizontal intercept would also have an important meaning. That would mean, when am I done paying it off? At what month has my balance come down to 0? So that also has a very important meaning here. So these two questions allow you to go through the rest of the questions much more easily. If you can determine what is my input, what is my output, it makes everything a whole lot easier. So I hope this video made sense. The x and y intercepts are going to be very important going throughout the rest of the semester. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll see you in the next video.